Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Goth Night here at Restitching the Tapestry. Sherri came up with the lovely idea of some black lipstick, so we all got out our black lipstick and had fun with it. So it feels great, you know. So again, welcome to episode number 51 of Restitching the Tapestry. Tonight's topic is diet culture, and we have our lovely guest, Sherri Archer from Sherri Makes Stuff, or Sherri Makes Things, right? Sherri Makes Things, right?
Stuff. Get it right the
Stuff.
first
It
time.
is
Stuff.
stuff. I always mix it up. But we have Sherri here joining us, and we're going to have a really interesting conversation about this very important topic, which is a very expansive topic as well. So we have some like discussion points, some sources that we've been working with, and we're hoping that it will help us break each aspect of this down succinctly. So first and foremost, how is everyone doing?
Pretty
Whoever
good.
wants to go
Yeah.
first, go for it.
I'm doing pretty good. I've had a low key week, recovering from the fact that I stayed over last week at Donny's, and we have been making videos. He's been slowly putting them out, and I've been putting out a couple videos that I made too. And I had so much fun, and yeah, and it was just a fun time that we had, and yeah, I'm just I've been just recovering.
Same. We had like a lot of like it was just like this creative supernova, and it's been a while since I've had a creative supernova, so I'm at this point where I'm like, you know, trying to recover from it. But it was well worth it, right?
Mhm.
Sherri, what have you been up to lately? How have you been?
I am well. Enjoyed the 5-day weekend last weekend. That was great.
Same.
And just I don't know. Semester's off to a roiling start, so that's good. I have some great students, having some great conversations, which I'm excited about. So,
Good. That makes me
yeah,
happy. My semester started out pretty well too. It's been very hectic, but that's typically how the beginning of each semester goes anyway, right?
right, right.
Okay. So before we get started with talking about our topic tonight, I do want to overview our show's mission statement. Many witness different atrocities, large or small, that fray the social fabric around us. Much of the time, many may feel powerless and know not how to address such things. This fray has gotten worse with the rise of social media, as we're able to share in trauma collectively as it goes viral in real time. And many communities, like marginalized communities, for example, are often the recipients of these atrocities and harbor this trauma. Our goal with Restitching the Tapestry is to use our privilege to have conversations about these different atrocities and topics with the hope of not only educating ourselves, but also perpetuating what we learn together here on our show. And we like to do this through creative conversation, through education, so on and so forth. And also, as a disclaimer for tonight, keep in mind we are going to be talking about a variety of different aspects regarding diet culture, which may include conversations about eating disorders. So I just wanted to provide a content warning here and now that if you feel uncomfortable with what we talk about, or if you anticipate anything might be triggering, please don't hesitate to click away because your mental health matters to us the most, and your well-being is paramount. Okay, so we just wanted to let you all know about that. So, where to begin with diet culture? This is such a sophisticated topic. Do we want to talk about the history of diet culture here first?
That's probably a good place to start. Where
Yeah.
does it come from?
Yeah.
Yes. So where does it come from?
So it started originally with Fletcherism. There was this guy named Fletcher, and he started with this diet called the chewing diet, where you basically like masticate, which is basically like you chew your meal so many times, like each bite of your food, until it becomes a liquid in your mouth. and then you swallow it. And it's supposed to be like that. The chewing makes it so that you digest it better, and that you you're expending so many calories chewing it that you lose weight that way.
Yeah. It was in the early 1900s. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the early 1900s, like 1905.
Yeah, I feel like there were there was like this whole cult that kind of came up almost, at the same time, because it wasn't just him. There was also like Kellogg of Kellogg cereals, right? Who had like a whole, basically a commune that was for working out. And he was specifically making the food bland and tasteless because it was supposed to control your, if you ate spicy foods and graham crackers, right? They created this very bland food. They kind of did it independently of each other, but also I think they knew each other. And their whole idea was like, if you ate this very bland food, then you wouldn't have these spicy desires, shall we say, sexual desires, and it could be population control. So it was a way of controlling the population by controlling the diet. And specifically, a lot of this the onus was put on women, because if women were indulging in tasteful, flavorful food and indulging their children in this food as well, then they would be raising these anxious, terrible kids who might, learn to pleasure themselves. And we don't want that, right? And they might learn the pleasures of sex, and we don't want that either. And then they're going to raise the next generation of terrible, horrible, sinful people. And that's just going to create the decline of society. So it was all about shaming women, because women were the ones in control of the household and supposed to raise the children. So this was a way to control specifically women, to control the population. So right from the get-go, being in control of our diet was about controlling people and controlling women's bodies.
Yeah. Ugh.
I know, gross, right?
It's
Right.
intense. Yeah, that's really intense. And well, it's interesting that we're talking about this topic, because I inherited some really old like cookbooks and dieting books from my grandmother. And some of these cookbooks date back to, I think it's like maybe like the 30s and 40s. And it would have like templates for diets that were considered productive diets at that time. And I remember like most of those diets involved like significant stints of starvation, limiting oneself to one meal a day, or eating like very peculiar portions and combinations of foods. Like there's this one recipe I remember that it was like eggs, coffee, and wine the entire day. Now, don't get me wrong, like coffee and wine throughout the entire day sounds delightful, right? But like the portions seemed very minimal. And if you're just eating that every day, like obviously one can imagine that probably would have some effect on the body that's not super good. But there were others that just seemed, again, focused on deprecation in some way, which is something that we still see today too.
Yeah. Well, there's an intense amount of shame, right, that is put on food, particularly, again, aimed towards women, although it's starting to be more towards men. And I also want to ask you, Donny, like, and I kind of put this in our notes as a question a little later on, but I also want to ask you, like, I see it as a feminist, like I understand it, and as a cis woman, I understand it from a female perspective largely. But I'm interested to know if you see this in the gay culture at all, because there is such an emphasis on body beautiful, particularly in the latter part of the 20th century, right? Like there was this big emphasis on the body beautiful and on being of a certain type and of a certain look. And if you didn't fit into that ideal, right? So this might be mostly a cis het kind of standpoint that I'm coming from, where, if a man eats a large meal, right, they're congratulated, like they conquered this plate, right? They did something heroic. Where if a woman were to do the same thing, then she's failed in some kind of way, right? Like she has done something evil and done something bad that she deserves to be punished for, right? So it's like this self-punishment that comes out of this shame, right? Because you've done something morally bad. It's not just that, oh, I ate something and I feel uncomfortable, right? And so that becomes its own punishment. Like, no, it's I've broken some kind of moral code, that I'm not supposed to bridge that gap. I'm not supposed to, satiate myself. And it does end up kind of getting into these cycles of, how do I, these diets become this kind of punishment that satisfy that need, right? That satisfy that need I need to punish myself because I've done something bad. Let me do this diet.
Mhm.
Right.
I'm glad that you brought that up. That's you make some very interesting points, and I appreciate you asking that question as well about like how diet culture manifests itself in the gay community. The truth is, diet culture has manifested itself in a big way, but it is so normalized and under discussed that it is almost like breathing, at
Mhm.
least from my observation. And mind you, I'm also saying this from the perspective of the fact that I have partaken in diet culture myself, in a variety of different ways, both healthy and unhealthy ways.
Mhm.
But for gay men, there is this very deep rooted relationship between how we present ourselves body wise, being connected with our sexual capacity,
Mhm.
and how that makes us powerful, or
Mhm.
it makes us more appealing versus somebody else. And it's gotten to the point for a lot of people where like eating disorders often do crop up
Mhm.
because of this insatiable need to want to be like everyone else,
Right.
if that, or to be appealing to everyone else.
Right. And I think the way you're talking about that is very similar for women or women presenting people. So that includes trans women as well. And also women of color and people of color, right? Because the ideal in our civilization, unfortunately, is that blonde-haired, blue-eyed white person, right? That's still our standard of beauty in this culture. And so if you have particularly dark skin, then you're also othered in that kind of way. And so there's this pressure to kind of hyper feminize yourself or hyper sexualize yourself so that you can count sexually, right? Because because I'm, a fat woman, I'm a large woman, I'm also, desexualized in that way. I'm overlooked in that way. I didn't, I always knew in an abstract way that women would get whistled at or they would get harassed by men, walking down the street. But that never happened to me until I was in my 20s and I'd lost a considerable amount of weight. And then suddenly out of the blue, I started getting that kind of attention and I didn't know how to handle it. Like I couldn't handle it emotionally because I'd never been faced with that before. There's a kind of anonymity and invisibility that comes from having this body. You know what I mean? And I think that's, kind of feeds into what you're saying.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because if we go back in time, like to my mid 20s, like I would argue that I was never really super appealing to gay men, at least not in a significant, overwhelming way, until I cut my hair. Because Ari remembers how long my hair used to be a long, long time ago. I cut my hair and I started like obsessively working out to the point where like it was like if I don't work out, I will have like a mental breakdown.
Another form of self-punishment. And that's wrapped up in
Exactly.
diet culture, right?
And see, the thing is, when I went through that transition, I was receiving positive validation for it though, because I started attracting more people. Like men looked at me and they were like, wow, Donnie's actually not that bad. Like, oh my goodness. And for me, like I had never had that attention. So while it was really overwhelming for me, I was also like consuming it in a way.
Yeah.
Like it was an adrenaline rush. It was exciting.
There's also a
Yeah.
kind of like, there's an unhealthy kind of like superiority that comes out of that too, right? Like I am succeeding where everybody else is failing. Like that's at least, I guess I can't speak for you, but that's how I felt in my 20s when I'd lost all that weight. And a very similar thing, like suddenly it was like, I was saying things like, oh, I'm in love with myself for the first time, or I'm seeing myself for the first time. I'm in love with my body for the first time. And you think about how troubling that wording is, right? Because it's like, if you're proud of yourself now, but you weren't before, or you weren't in love with your body before, that's a disconnect, right? Like, so what happens, because most people who lose weight gain it back. So what happens if you gain it back? That shame comes back, right? That
Right.
anger at yourself comes back. That, you know, destructive behavior again comes back, instead of understanding this is still my body. It's still beautiful. It is still worthy of love, right? We put a lot of emotional emphasis on, you know, how we look and achieving this ideal, right? This ideal gets put in our head, and a lot of it comes from the diet industry, right? And the diet industry, by the way, comes in all kinds of different stripes. It's not just that workout equipment. It's in fashion magazines. It's in workout magazines. Those workout magazines, those are nothing more than ads for products. That's all they are, right? Like those are not academic journals talking about, you know, health and exercise. Those are ads for products, and they are keeping you in that loop of those diet products. That's all that is. And we become so fixed on that ideal that most people can't possibly even attain, but we're given that in our heads, and that feeds something in us, right? This need to reach that ideal. And so, yeah, you get that positive reinforcement as you're working towards it, but it's not necessarily a positive thing, because what happens if you fail one day? What happens if you have a bad turn? What happens if you plateau for a while? When is enough?
But it's never enough. I lost weight, and I got down to what would be considered my ideal. I got down to 160 pounds. So I was fitting into a size 10, and I felt myself, and I was feeling great. I remember wearing a pair of jeans one day, and I was laying on the couch, and my boyfriend had his arm around my waist, and I felt skinny, and I was like, I'm in love with the way I feel right now. And I was like, oh my God, I've never felt this skinny before in my entire life. And I was like so happy and so proud of myself for finally having starved myself down to that weight. But then I was like, what if I could lose more and get down to a size 7 or a size 6? I'm like, I can just do it. I can just starve myself and get myself down. And I was like, I can set that goal and get down to that weight. And I was like, it's never, once you get down to that weight where you think you're ideal, because of what I had at the time was an eating disorder, it never becomes enough. You have to like get down even more. And that diet culture tells you, you have to get skinnier. You have to get to, you set a goal to even get more to a higher ideal. And you set like skinny isn't skinny enough until you're in dangerous ranges.
Yeah, there's never any message about here's how to love yourself. You know, here's how to stop. Here's how to maintain, right? That message is never out there. It's just lose more, work out more, take more protein powder, you know, work out more. Like none of us are going to be Thor in the next movie. Right? Nobody here is going to be Thor in the next movie. There's no reason for any of us to take protein powder. That should not be available to us, right? Like it's ridiculous that it is in protein bars and all that kind of stuff, but it's just diet and exercise culture, right? And then what is that? It's heavily loaded calories. So then you're in taking all of this energy, right? And then you're like, oh, why did I gain weight? Why did I gain fat? Right? And the notion of calories, like that's a way for us to quantify this system, right? So we can further punish ourselves, right? If you were to go, so I'm quoting Abigail Thorne. This is one of the YouTube videos that I'd shared with my colleagues here. Abigail Thorne, she's the YouTuber that goes under Philosophy Tube. And if y'all haven't watched her videos, highly recommend. She's really great. And she was talking about how, you know, this idea of calories is a way to quantify that kind of punishment to yourself, right? It's a way to where we can, you know, if you went back to ancient Roman times, is what she said. If you went back to ancient Roman times, you're like, hey, how many calories are in that food you're eating? They'd just be like, I don't even know what you're talking about, right? Like, what the F are calories, right? But this is the thing that we have learned. I mean, it's a thing. It's like miles are a thing, or kilometers are a thing, or inches are a thing, but it's also an abstract concept. But we use it as a way to quantify how successful we are or are not, right? In this. So it's a way to create this subjectification, right? To create a subject of ourselves, so we can look at ourselves in this, kind of way where we can quantify what we have accomplished or not accomplished, and it becomes another way to punish ourselves, right?
It builds
I
a
didn't do
beautiful
well.
castle. Yeah, it builds a beautiful castle on top of a foundation of shame,
Right?
and how
Can we
stable will
highlight
that be?
Rebecca Bullock's comment, because I just read it, and I was raised in a diet culture that said a woman's worth was in direct proportion with men, which value her physicality, sexuality. My mother was food obsessed. She dieted, she avoided, she overate, she had surgery, and she died because of American obsession with physical shape. I'm sorry that happened to your mother. And I
That's my cousin. So that was my aunt. She had bariatric surgery and she died from complications of it. Bariatric surgery that she arguably didn't really need, but she wanted to because she wanted to fit into this ideal. And we lost her because of this. And it was very tragic. Sorry, Art, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to give some context.
Yeah. And they will do those surgeries if you have the money. And if you have the desire to do it, all you have to do is just pony up the money and you'll do it. And they'll do it for you. And no questions asked. If you think that you need to lose the weight, they'll do it. And that's a shame, because they don't take into account factors of your health or what it could possibly do to you.
Yeah, when you think about that surgery, that you are physically and permanently altering your body, which was created to be this perfect system, right? To work together very symbiotically. You're perfectly changing it. And I mean, I'm not here to shame anybody who's felt that that's their last resort, but that's my point. Like, think about the point you have to be at where you're like, I need life altering and possibly life threatening surgery to solve this. That's the level of this is my last resort that these people have come to. And that's horrifying, right? That's absolutely horrifying that is our solution, right? And that's what we've come to. And again, no shame to anybody that's come to that conclusion. I understand it. I've considered it many times myself. And it just is terrifying, because many women in our family have had that surgery with various degrees of success. And it is a very scary thing. So thank you for sharing that story, Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you so
Rebecca.
much. And we're very sorry for that loss. But it just illustrates the dire situation in which a lot of people are in, or have been made to feel as though they're in order to get to that point. And to build off from what you were saying, Sherri, like in doing this episode, our goal isn't to sit here and say that all aspects of dieting are horrible, or that, any surgical options should be off the table, right? Like, if a person deems that it is the best thing that they need to do, that's like, they should be empowered to do so, right? But if you look at the sheer frequency and the representation out there that coaxes people into shaming themselves to the extent of feeling the need to do something life altering out of shame, that's when the problem becomes insidious,
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a good fine point to put on that. So,
and I think I ask a question that's kind of important later on, and maybe we can answer this question now because it's kind of an important question. Is diet culture about health? Like, does thinness equal healthiness and fitness?
It absolutely does not. I know many people who are thin, or I should say straight sized, right? Straight size as opposed to plus sized are considered, healthier than plus size people, and absolutely not. As you were saying, Ari, if you have an eating disorder, right, that's not healthier just because you're thin. If people who are bulimic, right, like they're eroding away their throat, their teeth, their gums, right, that's not healthier. I don't know. What do you think, Donny?
I mean, I agree. I don't think that it's healthier either necessarily because, I mean, and when we look at the system of diet culture itself, it is defined by physical appeal. And that standard for physical appeal is set by people in power, people who are defining what that representation looks like, people who are defining that messaging, and it's largely cis heterosexual men in a variety of different ways, right? Now, like, obviously, if we go back to the gay community, like, it involves like other sorts of power dynamics as well, but it all circulates back to that cruel cycle of like there is one group of people, or group of people who have greater access to things, greater abilities, when it comes to perpetuating information. They're the ones who set that stage,
Right.
sadly.
Right.
Also, on the flip side of the coin, just because you're fat doesn't also mean you're unhealthy either. You can be a fat person and be very healthy. You can have low blood pressure. You can be of a certain health and be fat too. And I think that we say that thin people can be unhealthy, but you can also be a fat person and be healthy as well.
Yep. Something my therapist and I have been working on is finding a doctor who believes in health at any size, right? Working towards health at any size. My size, if I have a cold, my weight doesn't have anything to do with that. If I have a pain in my shoulder, my weight doesn't have anything to do with that. Let's find other reasons for these problems. And sometimes one can beget the other. I don't need to lose weight to make my shoulder feel better, but if my shoulder felt better, I'd sure be a whole lot more active, right? Like in general. So, it becomes chicken and egg after a while.
That's an interesting point too. And I've had friends go through this, largely women go through this, where like doctors simply just ignore something more severe out of like, oh, well, you just need to lose weight and you'll be fine, or you're overhyping this, it's really your weight that's the problem. And to me, that's horrifying for some person to say.
Well, if I may share my story with you, I don't think the two of you actually know this. I think most of the people in the chat that I'm friends with know this, but you don't know this. So when I was 20, I was young, female, and poor, which is the bad trifecta of things in this country. And I didn't have good health insurance. And I was feeling very ill. I was in a lot of pain, and I kept going to the hospital to get help, and they kept just ignoring me and sending me home with narcotics. I was raised very, very naively, and I didn't know that people went to the hospital seeking drugs. I didn't know that was a thing. So they assumed I was a drug seeker, and so they would just send me home with a prescription and not even pay me any never mind. Well, come to find out, finally a doctor looked at me and palpated my abdomen and was like, holy crap, you're in a lot of pain, aren't you? Yes, thank you, I am. Come to find out, I had an 8-pound tumor growing off of my right ovary, and it was slowly killing me. And so I had to have a radical hysterectomy at the age of 20. And thank goodness for that one doctor, because I was ignored for well over a year that I was going through. I was having symptoms and going through all these problems. And it's exactly it. I was overweight, I was young, I was poor, and I was female. As absolutely invisible to the doctors, and just clearly did not count to the medical profession. So it's absolutely a thing.
Wow, that's scary. But I'm glad that you found someone who took it seriously.
Me too. Happy ending. I'm here to tell the story.
Right. Yeah. Oh my
It just took a
goodness.
while.
Right. So
I'm
Thank you for
lucky.
sharing that.
My doctor, I have Medicaid and now Medicare, and those are considered poor folks insurance. But I found a doctor who believes me when I say I have problems, and they don't often think about my weight. I do talk about losing weight because it's something that I have wanted to do, but it's not something that I necessarily am required to do. It's just something that we have discussed, but it's not something that they necessarily say is necessary for care. They just have given me pointers about, but they don't like prescribe drugs usually, and they definitely go, do you really want to lose weight? Like, do you, I mean, is this really something you want to do? Like, I can help you with it, but are you sure? Like,
right.
I mean, you're still fine. Like you'd have a low heart rate, like a heart attack,
Right.
probability. So you're in a healthy range. Like, you don't need to lose weight if you don't want to.
Well, that's good. That's very encouraging.
Yeah, that is.
And I think it's slowly changing. Do you agree with that? I think the conversation in the medical profession, I think it's slowly changing. I don't know. Do you think that's true?
I mean, I've personally not had a lot of experience with doctors telling me those sorts of things. I mean, that's largely because of my privilege being, a cisgender white man, of course. But I feel like a lot of it could depend on location as well.
It's true.
Like, I feel like in a lot of, like, in more rural settings, there might be doctors who are less apt to, take concerns like the experience you had, Sherri, seriously. Whereas in the city where there's more access, that conversation might be different. There's a discussion point that I have later on that I can talk about right now as well about diet culture being connected to social class and classist issues, which we've already touched on a little bit. And I found this article. It's titled "Why Clean Eating is a Class Issue" by Eve Simmons and Laura Dennison from 2019 on Refinery 29. And this source illustrates the lipstick effect. So they reference a situation during the Great Depression where lipstick prices rose dramatically despite the country being poorer and poorer at that time. People couldn't afford houses or cars, but they could afford to buy something small to make them feel better about themselves. And currently, and this has been shaping over history, that same thing happens with regard to food products, food consumption. And it really is interesting thinking about how, like, certain groups of people who have certain areas of access due to finances will do small things to make themselves feel better or make themselves feel as though they are partaking in the trend or what's, deemed acceptable, let's just say. It's very complex. I kind of think of it as like this spider web, like it connects to so many different things, but it all comes back to that central aspect, which is everything or almost everything being built on shame. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, when you think about any of these, first of all, I hate the term clean eating. Like, what does that even mean? I wash my vegetables first? Like, seriously, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's
It
meaningless.
is very obscure and abstract.
I think it kind of means that they eat whole foods instead of like processed foods.
But it's a meaningless term brought about by the diet culture. It's just to
It's
get
true,
you
yeah.
pay more money
Mhm.
for clean this or clean that. Like, you don't need to tell me that milk is gluten-free. You know what I mean? Like, you see some of these
Yeah.
products that are just ridiculous out there. Like, you don't need to tell me, you know, it's just something like, really, milk has always been gluten-free. Thanks for that. You know, like, you don't have to tell me these things. So it's just another part of diet culture. It's just feeding into people's fears and feeding into this idea of the ideal, you know, and, you know, the ideal self that's in there. You know, if I eat cleanly, right? And think about how positive a term that is, right? Don't we all want to be clean? I want to be clean, right? I want to be seen as
Mhm.
clean. I want to be seen as superior in some kind of way. So I'm going
Right.
to eat clean, right? And that will make me better in some way, or do a cleanse, right? What does that mean? I'm
Oh
gonna,
my gosh, don't even get
It
me started on
means you buy
those.
right?
overpriced juices from a juice bar in the city.
Right. That's literally all that means. I'm going to do it. I'm
Like
going
a
to do a
$10 pressed juice from the city that comes in a little glass bottle that you could have done at home for like 50 cents.
right. So it's just so ridiculous. And
Mm.
yeah, a lot of this stuff is cost prohibitive. So it is very much a classist thing. I grew up very, very poor. And so I'm very sensitive, as I mentioned. So I'm very sensitive to these kind of classist things because I really see it. You know what I mean? I see it, especially where we work, Donny, because we work in education, you know, in higher ed. So there is a kind of, it's a very different environment than I grew up in. You know, it's a very white collar environment. And I grew up around a lot of blue collar people. And I have to remember to, you know, pull back the Bay City accent and, you know, not swear in front of them, right?
Oh my gosh, I relate to that so much.
It took me a long time to get my Bay City accent out of me, but get me drunk or get me agitated, then it'll come out. But it is very much a classist thing because, you know, when we grew up, like, you know, we were lucky to have bread, you know, much less, you know, special keto, this and that, and whole seeds, clean, whatever bread. Like,
Well,
come on now.
addition.
The only thing I like
Our-
about keto are their ice cream bars. Those are some dang good ice cream bars.
Oh, I've had those before. They were pretty good. We're not denying that there might be some positive, small aspects to some of these
But
diets.
come on, if you're gonna do keto, or
Hashtag
the
not
Atkins
sponsored.
diet, Atkins diets are a shame because it's just meat and cheese. Like, why would you do that to yourself? You're just gonna have the farts.
Well,
Being
wasn't
lactose
there,
intolerant, that sounds horrifying.
right? Wasn't there a recent diet that was very similar? That was just like mostly meat and cheese. I'm trying to think of what it was. It's just like it all keeps coming around.
There's so many, you know.
Yeah.
Like it's interesting that I mean, because we did talk about like growing up living in poverty and that article, which of course is something I relate with as well, but that article that I was just talking about talks about like how like lower class families, for example, would work with what they could have access to. And that would often shape diets. And I remember like being a kid, like both of my parents had jobs and everything, but of course, if you weigh in the cost of living that was on the rise, so on and so forth, like and with time as well and resources, sometimes the only access to meals I would have might be like, you know, an array of instant meals or, you
Mm-hmm.
know, things that were, you know, quick and easy to prepare on a very tight work schedule.
Mm-hmm.
It's again, it comes back to that whole spider web effect. There's so many variables attached to it, but it all
Mm-hmm.
leads back to that one thing, you know.
And it like, and you know, and we feel guilty about this and we feel terrible about this, but weren't our parents raising all that stuff and they're the longest living generation, right? They're all living to be in their 90s and 100s. So clearly it didn't kill them. You see what I'm saying? Like, yeah, it's probably not the best thing to eat every day, but at the same time, like this stuff has been engineered to like its nth degree. Like it's not at the end of things, it's in moderation. It's not going to kill you, right? Like there's no shame in my Totino's pizza rolls that are calling my name now in the kitchen. Now that you mentioned prepared
Oh,
foods, I remembered I have those.
I love those.
You know, like it's, you know, you're allowed to feed your body. You know what I mean? And you're allowed to enjoy, like food is so
They
pleasurable.
grew up in the 70s with like sugar bombs and like all all the worst stuff that you could possibly, like whole milk and cheese. Like they grew up with like the worst stuff that you could possibly eat, and they are just fine.
Yeah. I mean, you know, and worse, right? Like that's a judgment word, right? You've just put judgment on that, right? It's worse stuff or it's better stuff. Like it's just food. It's all just food. It doesn't have an emotional quality to it.
That's what Neil tries to tell me, at least.
Yeah, we are layering that emotional quality on top of things. We're layering that emotional, right? And food is such a pleasurable thing to do. It's enjoyable. It tastes good, right? And yet we put all of this negative stuff on it so that we don't allow ourselves to enjoy it. Isn't that depressing?
It's true, yeah.
Right? It gives you endorphins, right? It's like one of the few things that's legal that can give you endorphins.
It's so like, and you were mentioning the ritualistic aspect of dining and food. Like it's not to say that it's always a bad thing necessarily, but it has become so ritualistically ingrained that we will adjust anything we can in order to fit the template of what that ritualistic dining experience or culinary experience should look like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm basically like trying to lose weight because I'm up to 250 pounds, which technically my dress size is the average assigned female at birth dress size. I'm 18, size 18. So I'm not even, I can still find my dress size at the store. So I'm not even into the plus size where it's at a point of its problem. I'm considered what would be like considered skinny fat or the average size, where, you know, I don't have to go online to buy my clothing. I don't have to get things tailor-made. You know, I can still find clothes at the store in the female section if I shop in the female section. So, you know, it's not a problem, but I would like to be a little bit smaller just so I have that wiggle room.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of a matter of pride almost, like to be like skinnier, like, oh, you know, I don't want to be on the very edge of the dress sizes. I don't want to, but you know, Old Navy, they made it so that they have their clothes where it's 0 to 28 in the store. So if I needed to find clothes now, it's like, I don't even have to worry about it anymore. I have somewhere to go where I can buy clothes and not worry about that. So I was like actually really happy about that there was actually a store I could go to and buy affordable clothing. And it's all in one section.
Well, this kind of dovetails into our conversation a few weeks ago about fashion. Like the numbers in women's clothing is absolutely meaningless. It's absolutely meaningless. Like every company has their fit size that they start with, and it's a size 8. And every fashion house has their own size 8. So none of them have anything to do with one another. And then they size up from there. Some companies just continue to size up. So if you've ever tried on something that was plus size, so that switch happens between a 1X and between an extra large and a 1X. That's where that shift happens between straight sizing and plus sizing. And so some companies will just continue to size up into the 1, 2, and 3X, and then they call it quits from there. So if you've ever tried something on and it was like really huge in the shoulders and really long in the arms, that's because they didn't adjust their pattern. They just kept going up with it. And so that means everything gets bigger, it gets longer, it gets taller, and it gets wider. Whereas some companies will readjust their patterns because once you're up into the 1X, 2X, 3X sizes, your body proportions change. And so how the fat is distributed on your body changes. And that changes over time as you get older. The proportion of where your body fat rides on your body changes. And so these pattern manufacturers, some companies, once they get up into those plus sizes, then they will refit the size. They will come up with a new fit size starting with that 1X, and they will redraw the pattern so that the shoulders aren't getting really big and the sleeves aren't getting really long, and then they will size up from there. But it's all meaningless because it's starting from a moving point, a moving target. It's starting from a 0 point that doesn't mean anything. And that's starting to happen in men's clothing. Men's clothing has historically all been based on numbers, right? And on inches, like things that make sense. So if you have a 32, 29 pant, that means you are 32 inches around the waist and your inseam is 29 inches from your crotch to your ankle or wherever you like your pant legs to be. That is starting to not be true anymore. You can start to find 32-inch pants that are more like a 35-inch waist when you measure it, not actually 32 inches. So there's, and this is
Why would they do that?
It's called vanity sizing, because people don't want to admit they're actually 35 inches around the waist. They feel better when they buy 32-inch pants, the same 32-inch pants they bought in college. Now that they're 45, they can buy that same size and feel good about themselves. It's a marketing ploy to get you to buy more clothes.
It's to get you to, it's to get you to be satisfied with those rose-tinted glasses that you like to wear.
And in women's clothing, they have been adjusting this for years. They adjusted it like industry wide. They do these vanity sizing adjustments. They did it in the 80s. They've done it in the 90s. Like every 10, 20 years, they adjust the sizes upwards. So now, a 26 from today doesn't fit like a 26 from 1985. It would be a 26 from 1985 would actually probably fit more like a 20 or a 22 today.
Huh.
Interesting. I never realized that.
So it changes over time. So if you see like a pattern from the 1940s or 50s, like a clothing pattern that's like a size 14, that's going to be more like a size 6 or 8 today.
Wow.
So it shifts. It's an ever moving target. So again, these are numbers that we use to punish ourselves. So don't anchor yourself to something that is not real. This is not real. This is not a real thing. This is a made up thing. It's an arbitrary number that's just thrown out there. So you have a relative size difference. So I can say, okay, this size is about 2 inches bigger than this one is. That's literally all I can give you. But don't get emotionally tied up into these sizes because they are literally meaningless, right? Just know, okay, I'm going to try this size on. This is the size I was last time. I'm going to try this size on. Okay, no, that doesn't fit me. I need about a 2-inch wiggle room. I'll go up the next size. But don't get emotionally, oh, that means I'm in a size 26 now. No, it doesn't. It just means that article of clothing was cut in that way to where that's what they decided to call it. But it literally is meaningless. You can go in the same line of clothing and pick up a garment of clothing that's a 26, hold it up against another 26, and they'll be completely different. Like they'll fit completely different. So don't get yourselves emotionally wound up into sizes or pounds, right? Like, again, this is like calories. These are artificial things that we use to punish ourselves. This is part of diet culture. Diet culture has fed this to us, right? Your pounds, like, muscle and fat weigh different from each other. So if you start working out with weights, you're going to put on pounds because you're putting on or stay the same. You might even, like in the mean average, not change weight at all because you're changing your body composition, right? Worry about how you feel. Worry about how the clothing fits. Worry about your health. Right? Literally your health. And don't let the health trolls out there be like, oh, I'm just worried about your health. Screw them. Unfriend them. Block them out of your life. The people are like, oh, you should lose weight because I'm worried about your health. Get rid of them. They're not helping you at all. They have bought into diet culture and they're unsavable. You do what feels good for you and you stick to that, right? Whatever feels good for you. Feed your body. Don't starve yourself, right? Love yourself and love your body. I say this as somebody who punishes herself all the time, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I know. I'm punishing myself right now. Like I went over to Donny's house and I was like, Donny, I'm only supposed to be eating 900 calories a day. And that's how I lose weight. And I'm like,
oh no. Oh, honey girl. No, again, see, we're using those calories to punish ourselves.
It's terrible because that's the only way I've been seeing inches come off on the scale, and I've been seeing productivity is if I eat only a few amount, and I'll only eat one meal a day. It's bad. It's bad right now. I've been really punishing myself lately.
Well, I love you, Ari, and you are worthy and you are worth feeding yourself.
Yeah, I know, but
So-
it's so hard. You hear these things and you know it's inherently true, but then like the reality comes to it and you're like,
there's
but
that
I'm not.
there's that ideal, right? That ideal that you have in your head of, hey, I want to be around this size so I don't have to just be in plus size clothing, or I don't have to just do this or just do that. And that's a struggle. Again, this all comes from the diet industry. This all comes from this message that we're all fed from children, and it feeds into our lizard brains. You know what I mean? It feeds into our utmost desires, right? It's so that's why it's effective. That's why it works so well, is because it's feeding that part of ourselves and how we see the world and how we see ourselves. And it's terribly damaging. And one of the questions that you'd brought up, and maybe you meant to close with this, and I'm sorry if I'm bringing it up now, but one of the questions you'd brought up was, do you think it'll ever change? Do you think the diet industry will ever change? And I don't think it ever will. It is so ingrained in us, and it is so ingrained in our mindset and how we deal with the world. I can't see an end to it, honestly. We just have to, as individuals, through therapy, through friendship, through, these kinds of connections, these kinds of conversations, we have to learn how to overcome it on a one-to-one kind of basis. And it's tough because the whole capitalist system is against us.
Yeah, it's all about like consumerism, and
Mm-hmm.
so long as there are people consuming and institutions willing to put stuff out there, it's going to be a cruel cycle that won't stop. But I really like that you painted it as though like it's something that we have to be vigilant about ourselves, and I think that that's unbelievably true. And I think the more people who do that, we will see like larger groups or institutions. Like I mean Ari, we could talk about Old Navy, right? Like that small gesture of them including those sizes
Mm-hmm.
seems like positive momentum in some way, right? It
But
doesn't fix
it's
the
also kind
problem.
of a little bit tacky because, or like mean, because it goes from 0 to 28, but if you're a size 30 you have to get online, so that one size you have to get online if you're a size 30.
Yeah.
So
It's still exclusionary. Yep.
Yeah.
it's still
It's a weird arbitrary line, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, I feel like all we can do is just support each other and try not to be judgmental of each other, because we're all going through this struggle. We're all dealing with this. You know what I mean? And we have to try and, be supportive of each other and recognize that struggle within each other and just be like, look, I'm here for you. I want to take care of you, Ari. I want to love you
Right.
because, you deserve to be happy. We all do, right? Everybody in the
We
chat.
do.
Is
I
there any
just wish
chatter in the
that there
chat?
was like less. I wish that there was less discriminatory practices towards people who are fat. That if you were fat, that like you weren't discriminated against in jobs and in life. Like there's so much anti-fatness out there that like that's why I feel like I have this need to be thinner, is because there's so much anti-fat hate out there, and that I feel like I can maneuver in the world better if I were thinner, and that being of a certain size, you get a certain amount of like disgust towards you because you're of a certain size. Like it's not that I don't mind being this weight. It's not that. It's that I feel like I can't maneuver in the world at a certain point because like the environment itself becomes hostile, like sitting in chairs and having people look at you a certain way and people reacting to you in a certain manner becomes almost harder because I'm of a certain size.
Mm-hmm. It's true that's absolutely out there. Like when I walk into a space, I always have to look around and see, is there a chair for me? You know what I mean? Like that's sometimes it's no. Sometimes all they have are narrow little chairs that my big old ass isn't going to fit in. Sometimes they got, flimsy chairs that I'm going to sit down in.
The chairs with the arms in them.
Mm-hmm.
I have to wonder if I can sit in those appropriately, or if they're wide enough for me to sit in. And that used to not be a thing. I used to be straight sized enough that I would be able to sit in those okay, because I was a size 12 or smaller. And now I'm big enough that I cannot sit in those chairs effectively anymore.
But you have to understand that's not a failing of you. That is a failing of that place to not have that accommodation for you. Right? They want customers. They should be able to accommodate their customers, whatever space that's in. They should have seating for you and for me, because I have exactly the same problem. And I don't even feel a little bit sorry about being like, I'm sorry, I'm going to smush that chair. Like you've seen me, like you got to be kidding. Or when a waiter wants to sit me down in a booth that's like this narrow, like, how am I going to fit in there exactly? You got a shoehorn and Vaseline? Because that's not going to happen otherwise.
Or stools. Oh my God. Hate
or like
stools.
High top chairs. When my skinny friends want to sit in a high top table, I'm like, you going to call AAA to haul me up there? Because I can't get up there otherwise. Like, are you kidding me with this? I'm working against gravity here, people. Come on. Right? Like, there's just like, you have to think about the physicality.
With the little thing like this for the seat, and it's like,
right.
You want me to put my big butt on that?
Right. It's like, you don't seem to understand. This is going to become a sexual fetish real quick. Like, it's going to get inappropriate really, really fast. So unless you're ready for that conversation, we need to find someplace else to sit. And I don't feel a little bit sorry about that. And you shouldn't either. The physicality and the realities of my body are the physicality and realities of my body. You wouldn't shame somebody who was missing a leg. You wouldn't shame somebody who, was too tall. You wouldn't shame somebody who was too short, right? You wouldn't shame them for, if somebody was too short and couldn't get up into a high top table. You wouldn't shame
somebody who was pregnant or
right.
Somebody.
Exactly. It's just the physicality of our bodies. It's just the reality of life. And I refuse to be shamed for that. I refuse to let some arbitrary designer somewhere who just wanted to win awards and feel good about themselves, for them. Now make a functional chair that looks good, like now make a functional space.
But that's because fat people are the invisible person that doesn't get often thought about when they think about designing a space.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? Then that's fine. Then that space doesn't deserve my presence. And I go somewhere else and I enjoy another space that does want me there and does have space for me and does accommodate. And it really is as simple as that. And if my friends, we have a restaurant here in town, I don't want to name, but it's across from the planetarium in Bay City. And they have terrible chairs. Like, I can't fit in them, and they're metal, so they don't give at all. And anytime my friends want to go there, I'm like, I don't physically fit in their chairs. We have to go somewhere else. It's like, I'm not sorry. I'm not even sorry about it. Like, if you want me there, then we have to go somewhere else.
Do you know what the worst space is for fat people? Airplanes.
Oh, yes.
I had a lot of, I finally flew for the first time a couple of years ago, and I felt I was very apprehensive about it at first, but after talking to several fat people, I started to feel better about it. And you know what? I asked for the extra safety belt, like the extension. And I was like, and the stewardess, she was just like, flight attendant, sorry, I'm old. The flight attendant was like, sure, no problem. Handed me didn't even think about it, right? That's her job. Like, she didn't shame me. She didn't look bad at it. She's just like, yep, let me get one for you, and handed it to me. No problem. It was like, they were super accommodating and super nice. You just ask for the accommodations. You'd be surprised what's out there.
Yeah.
The guy next to me, I couldn't reach my bag. I had to, kick it under the seat in front of me, and then I wanted it because I had a water bottle in there. The guy next to me was so nice. He reached down and got it for me. He was super helpful. It's like Mr. Rogers said, you look for the helpers in the world.
I love that. And ideally, I wish more people were like that.
Yeah.
And the truth is, like, I think for people who are fat and for people who do struggle with like diet culture, like the fear of public humiliation, I think, is the most debilitating fear.
Yeah.
And based on those different areas that both you and Ari were mentioning, like I can imagine that pressure is extremely anxiety inducing
Yeah.
at
It
all
is.
times.
The last time I was on an airplane, I was in the middle seat between two very skinny people, and they were like crowding the armrests. So I was sitting like this in the middle of an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, this is a nightmare. This is my nightmare.
Yeah, it is. Those kinds of public spaces can be challenging. And you're absolutely right, Donnie. Like it is that shaming. But again, you have to remember that that is somebody else either being thoughtless because they've just never been, right? So they don't understand what they're doing. And I think that's most people fall into that. They just don't understand that they're not being accommodating. They're not trying to be cruel. And so I try to look at it from that standpoint. And I just ask for my space. Like, excuse me, I'm sorry. Would you mind if I had a little bit of room? I'm so sorry. Like, is that okay? And, just ask for that space, and make your space be known. Like, you are allowed to take up space. It's another thing as women, we're not allowed to do, right? We're not allowed to take up space. That's wrong. We are allowed to take up space. Mm-hmm.
It's so hard to
Ari,
insist upon it, though.
oh yeah, Ari, I remember I can't remember what the title of the video was, but you made a video a long time ago that was really interesting to me, where you were talking a little bit about your dietary habits and physical appearance and the expectation for physical appearance, and you mentioned words like poised and like diminutive and having like not being slovenly. Like I remember you used the words poised versus slovenly, and I can't help but think about like how society defines like those different appearances, like because like we seem to have like this ingrained notion of what it means, especially for women, right, to appear poised. And I'm trying to think of another word. It's another word to use along with poised, but I can't remember what it is.
You know what though? I wanna not just say that this is just straight people or just women. I'm sorry. I also want to say that this is true for gay men as well and gay women as well,
Yeah.
right? Like if you come off as too effeminate, right? If you like, there's
Yeah.
always that kind of checking that you're doing. Like you're also trying not to take up that space, right? So you're not going to get that kind of public shaming. So, and especially like I have, a friend who's gay and he's a big man, right? He's a big guy. And he also, right, like struggles with those things, struggles with taking up space as well as, having that gay identity. Like these are, I think this is not, it's not the same, but I think similar.
There's
Right?
parallels, yeah. Like I feel
Parallels.
like there are connections that can be made between them because it all centers around a power dynamic regarding what is deemed socially acceptable or physically appealing to very specific groups of people who define those things. Yeah. Ooh, this has
So
been such a
smash the
great
patriarchy.
conversation. Yes.
Patriarchy.
This is like, honestly, this has been a great conversation, and I could easily see a second episode following up on it because there were a few other questions that we could have continued with. So I think that it would be really cool if we did a part 2. So I don't know how either of you feel about that. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm down.
Okay.
I thought that when I saw our list of questions, I was like, are we going to do this all in an hour?
Oh yeah. We end up doing that sometimes. We'll like have like a very ambitious set of questions and it's like, oh wait, like well, part 2, why not, right?
Was there anything good in the chat? I didn't hear anything from the chat. I don't get to see the chat,
so let's see.
If you click on to the right side, you can see the comments.
Oh.
So Leo made some comments about sizing, like for a specific brand. Arpy says your worth is not defined by weight. Jennifer says the middle seat is definitely always the worst on airplanes. We had a good amount of people on tonight. Like we had Tara here, Panda Alsatian, Joe King was here. Yeah, we had quite a few people commenting in the chat. We really appreciate that, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah. And hey, Leo, I got your email. I'll email you back. I'm just lazy and I haven't emailed you back.
Well, with the degree of emails that we get on a regular basis.
Right.
In our line of work. But so we will make plans to continue this conversation because this like diet culture and the different things surrounding it is such a sophisticated topic with multiple layers, and there are more things that definitely need to be said. So we have notes ready to go for the next one, basically. So of course, as we conclude this, don't forget to click like on our video. If you are watching this after this stream and you would like to comment, we will be keeping track of the comments, and we will respond. Also, please subscribe to our channels. Subscribe to Sherri Makes Stuff, which I got it right this time. Strange Nothings, which is Ari's channel. And for some odd reason, if you're not subscribed to mine yet and you're here watching this, well, click on that red button, please. Anyway, we love you all. Thank you for joining us tonight, and you have a good night. Bye.
Bye.